Here at Psychology Ninjas, it's the turn of cognitive psychology and the working memory model. How are we going to go about explaining accessing our AO1 marks for the working memory model? Well, we need to think about models as theories in cognitive psychology, so we're going to explain all of the key terms associated with the theory. When thinking about models, it's often useful to have a diagram. With working memory model, we start with the central executive, which has two slave systems. One is the phonological loop, which contains the phonological store and the articulatory process, and the other one is the visuo-spatial sketchpad, which includes the visual cache and the inner scribe. You can also talk about these in terms of the inner ear and the inner eye in terms of the phonological loop and the visuo-spatial sketchpad. Added later, and it's really key that you have in mind that this was added in 2000, were the episodic buffer linking into long-term memory. When we're thinking about this in terms of our knowledge, we need to have at least two different pieces of information about each of our stores, and explain that the process of information is going to and from each of these stores. Always useful is that all stores have a limited capacity. When explaining each of the subcomponents of each store, you need to explain the role rather than just identifying what they are. So in terms of the phonological loop, just saying that there is a phonological store and articulatory process isn't enough. You would have to say that the phonological store holds auditory information and the articulatory process allows for maintenance rehearsal. The same is also true for the visuo-spatial sketchpad and the central executive. Again, I'm going to repeat it here because it's really important. The episodic buffer wasn't added until 2000, and so if it doesn't refer to 2000, if it says the 1974 model, you need to make sure that you're not including that. So how do we go about evaluating? Well, this is a theory, and therefore we're looking at a SODA approach here for evaluation. So if we're breaking this down, we're thinking about our arguments for and against to develop logical chains of reasoning. So we're going to be explaining KF as a case study, findings only here because we're talking about supporting research, and we're going to counter that with a problem with using brain damaged patients and case studies. So if we're thinking about this in terms of our 8 marker, evaluate the working memory model, we're thinking about that interwoven approach where we're explaining and then evaluating. Here we suggest you start with the phonological loop and then giving our 2 details about the phonological loop and then talk about research support. The fact that KF could do visual tasks but not verbal tasks suggests that his phonological loop was damaged. If we're thinking about our mini conclusion here, we're thinking about external reliability potentially being a problem because this is a brain damaged patient and they have unique abilities. As we move on through, then we talk about the visuo-spatial sketchpad, again including 2 unique details, and then talk about this model lacks validity. That Badley et al.'s dual task technique was a laboratory experiment and therefore lacks mundane realism. The fact that the task itself in terms of remembering word lists was not very useful. However, we can talk about Badley et al.'s dual task performance being a useful piece of research, and it has high levels of generalizability because both men and women were used in this study. We're then going to move through and talk about the central executive, 2 details here, and then we're going to be using our different theory, that this is reductionist, that specifically the central executive lacks clarity and is difficult to test in isolation because it is the thing that controls the other stores. We're going to develop this further by saying actually the central executive may also have subcomponents within it, using EVR as our case study. Therefore, overall, the working memory model lacks validity, specifically the central executive, and the role of it lacks accuracy. Finally, we can talk about the episodic buffer being added and that we can use this to apply and work with patients with brain damage and with also dementia. Reducing the need for multitasking, especially if someone has dementia, not asking it to rely on too many different components simultaneously because we're going to overwhelm the capacity. We can give another suggestion in terms of one person speaking at a time. This adds credibility to our theory, to our model. Okay, let's have a look at an exam question. Here we've got a 4-mark question, explain. This is asking us to give description and detail. Key thing here is that this is the 1974 model. Therefore, we do not include the episodic buffer. Let's have a look at another exam question. Here we've gone for 8 marks. The command word here is discuss, and therefore we need to explain and apply. We are explaining our knowledge of the working memory model. And we're linking that in to why Dave should listen to music when completing his homework. Thanks for joining us today here at Psychology Ninjas. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that bell. See you next time.